Hey, I'm Droolbatz. So nice of you to stop by. Today I'm going to be reviewing the 2015 horror movie Hayride. I'll be reviewing it based on its premise, its production value, and finally how it compares or contrasts to other films, TV shows, etc. of the genre. Hope you enjoy. So, a college student named Steven and his girlfriend Amanda are going back to Steven's home in Alabama for Halloween. He's explaining to her that each Halloween his family hosts this hayride that's kind of like a haunted house, except instead of doing scary things in a house, they dress up as like serial killers or whatever and do these spooky scenes out in the woods, and a hay wagon will bring the people they'll be riding, and it'll bring them to each stop. A scene will appear, they'll move on, another scene here, and it's kind of like that. And he's kind of usually helps them out, and like the whole family participates and stuff, and it's a thing that they do. When Amanda gets there, Steven's uncle tells her about this one character, this serial killer named Pitchfork, that their grandfather had invented, and how he was really scary or whatever, but they retired him since the grandpa passed away. But it turns out that the grandpa didn't invent this character, Pitchfork. Pitchfork was a kind of like an urban legend, except they're in a rural area, so like I guess a rural legend about this guy who had a beautiful daughter that he tried to protect, and one day she ran away with some boy, and when he tried to find out like which of the crazy neighbor kids ran away with his daughter, he ended up killing like all the neighbors because he didn't know which one specifically took his daughter. Yeah. Oh, and he killed them with a pitchfork, by the way. So he's Pitchfork, the pitchfork killer with a pitchfork. Pitchfork. And anyway, as they set up for this hayride, a mysterious figure that is not part of the family shows up, and things start going awry. But who could it possibly be? What could he possibly want? Who is this person? That's the premise. It felt like a homemade movie, if that makes sense, but it felt like a high quality homemade movie. Like it felt almost like a C or a D film. The exposition was fairly slow. It was a lot of, the boyfriend Steven telling Amanda while they're eating at a diner or something, like all about this legend. And it's like 8 solid minutes of talking. I remember being like, oh, that's a lot. That said, I don't normally like that in films, but I'll let it slide this time because they were kind of like flirting and bantering back and forth during it. And it kind of, while it was like slightly ham-fisted, it definitely, I thought, worked all right for this scenario. The movie had a generally slow pace to it. It wasn't super slow, but it was a lot slower than I was anticipating. It generally moved along fairly slowly, and some of the people who criticized the movie complained that nothing actually scary happened until like at least like 50 minutes into the movie, and I would agree. The film had a very elaborate set. Obviously it was set in like a rural area, but they had like a shed where they were doing some Halloween setup and barns and like all this stuff, and you got to see a lot of it in the movie. So I was really glad that they utilized that, and I think that's it definitely like made the film a little bit more immersive. I noticed that the scenes, a lot of them had like this kind of interesting filter on them. It almost felt like the colors were like overly filtered in an amateurish way that you just really don't see in a lot of like professional grade movies. That said, the colors that did feel a little bit like more saturated than usual tended to err on the side of warm rather than cool colors, and I did like that. A lot of movies that oversaturate their colors go for a very like cool tone, and so the movie visually stood out in that way. There was also a lot of nice light and dark contrast. A lot of movies shot in the digital age tend to go for a more subtle look and don't use a lot of light and dark contrast. But I find that light and dark contrast honestly like helps a movie feel stronger visually, and this movie did that pretty well. As far as acting and script goes, there was a lot of banter, and while it was like kind of amusing, it really didn't do anything to edge the plot on. The actors, they were okay, but between them and the script, there was a lot of chatter in the movie that kind of felt like dead time. Like it wasn't really establishing the relationship between the characters that much. Like, I think one scene of banter would have been fine, but they did a lot of slow banter scenes. And while it's like, that's, that's pleasant to watch or whatever, it didn't really add to the horror, and it didn't really progress the plot any or elaborate on the characters' relationships. So it felt a little bit tedious after a while. The music in the movie was, I thought, quite effectively done. It aired a little on the side of traditional, which I like traditional sound effects and the kind of classical horror movie, music in the background. So I thought they did that really well. And another compliment is the dialogue audio was very strong. I've watched a lot of movies recently where they were not super well mixed audio wise, and I think that was might have been an artistic choice, but I really struggled to hear what the heck was being said. So this was kind of like a nice contrast to that. The banter that they were having a lot of, I did think it was humorous, but because the movie was generally slow paced and the acting, it was all right, but it was definitely amateur. It wasn't like, oh, this super has my attention, you know what I mean? The special effects were very suitable for the movie. They weren't super flashy by any means, and they didn't need to be, so I thought they made a smart choice with that, not doing anything too difficult. Yeah, this is Chekov, and she says hello. She laid down. Now I'm going to be discussing how this movie stands apart from or blends into other films of the genre, or other TV shows, or whatever. So I will be probably spoiling part of the movie for you. So I suggest, if you don't want spoilers, that you leave now. I'll give you a minute to do that. I'll pet my cat, who literally just joined me while you do that. As one might assume, things totally go awry when an unexpected person shows up. He shows up with a pitchfork and starts stabbing people and killing people slowly, one by one by one by one. As he starts killing a bunch of people, Steven and Amanda basically have to outrun him and eventually kind of confront him. There's a final battle, and the guy is killed. The police show up, and apparently they have been looking for this guy, and it is revealed that he's a super old man. You kind of realize, oh, wait a second, were the pitchfork legends true? Like, the thing that the grandpa supposedly made up, like, it's a true legend. It's not just people saying, like, oh yeah, this guy, it's a legend, haha. Like, he actually was killing a bunch of people. While it wasn't the most unique thing that I've ever seen premise-wise, I didn't think that the movie borrowed too heavily from any other movies or TV shows that I've seen. The only similarities I could really see between this movie and any other things were like very, very vague generalizations. For example, there's an episode of Criminal Minds where if you reduce the plot down to the bare bones of it, it's essentially some people in a southern state in a rural area believe in this creepy legend of a serial killer or something living in the woods, and it eventually turns out he's an actual guy, and it's not just a legend, it was based in fact. That's kind of the only similar thing I could think of. Altogether, I think the movie Hayride did a really good job of not ripping off of or alluding to other films that it didn't need to, and it was a very self-contained story. If I had to rate this film, I'm going to be a little bit more generous, I think, than some of the comments on the actual video were, but I would give it a 3 out of 5 for being a low-budget movie. It felt pretty professional for being low budget, although it clearly was low budget. Obviously, if we're throwing A films into the mix, I'd give it like maybe a 2.5 out of 5 stars. The acting and the slow pacing of the movie were kind of, I think, what bogged it down. While most of the shots weren't necessarily artistic, ooh, fancy cinematographer stuff, they were effective for what the film was trying to do. And I really admire how the editors worked on it, but just the slow pacing was very much a detraction. I think this is a great movie for someone who's interested in watching a horror movie, but is not a huge horror fan and is a little concerned that horror movies are too scary. This is a great kind of beginner horror film if you're interested in watching one. Again, I really liked how the music was done. I really liked the strong audio. I don't know, ultimately I thought it was a good effort. of a film, even though obviously it was hit and miss depending on what you're looking for in a film. I'd be really curious to know what you thought if you saw the movie. Are you a harsher judge than I? Did you like it? Let me know. Leave a comment if you've seen it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope it was helpful for you. And please consider subscribing if you like my reviews. I review horror movies and just out here having fun, and I hope you're having fun too. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye. This is Chekov. She says hello.